limiting the threats that those officials continue to face. With that, I turn to Ranking Member Grassley for his opening.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Durbin. Our hearing today is on threats against election workers. Threats of violence are never acceptable. Any threat of violence. Violence is a very major problem in America today, with rates of violent crime skyrocketing across the country. Not since the 1990s have we seen these levels of murder, assault, carjacking, robbery, attacks on police, and other violent crimes. The start of this violent crime wave began in 2020 as police nationwide were pulled off the streets. A study from the Council of Criminal Justice showed that murders in major cities in 2021 were 44% more than in 2019. So far this year, major cities of Baltimore, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, and New York City are already worse than in 2021. The baseline is rising. Higher rates of violent crime are becoming the new norm. Some of the main causes of this rise in violent crime are anti-police rhetoric, de-policing efforts, progressive prosecution, bail reform, defund the police movements. We talk about the crisis faced by law enforcement officers last week in this very committee in our hearing about attacks on police. This crisis in policing is happening at the same time that progressive prosecutors refuse to hold violent criminals accountable for their crimes. Witness after witness in this committee has told us that bail reform helps to release violent criminals who then can go commit more crimes. We all heard about the horrible story that occurred at Waukesha, Wisconsin, when a man drove into the parade of people, killing 6 people and wounding many more. He was out on bail for a violent crime. He should never have been free, but a progressive prosecutor and lax laws allowed him to get out and kill all those people. Research is clear that a huge amount of violent crime in any city is committed by a very small number of repeat offenders. Just think, if police and prosecutors can focus on those offenders, they can improve the situation very significantly. But because of difficulties at the state level in terms of understaffed police departments, progressive prosecutors who turn a blind eye to violent crime, and state legislatures who often soften criminal laws and implement bail reform, states don't seem to be solving this problem, nor are they able and capable of doing it all alone. Federal support is necessary. Congress must treat violent crime as a very top priority. For this reason, last week I introduced Combating Violent and Dangerous Crime Act. The bill contains common sense proposals to reduce the spike in violent crime in the nation, proposals that would expand federal prosecution options for offenses like murder, carjacking, bank robbery, and assault on police. All of my fellow Republicans on this committee have co-sponsored this bill, and I thank them for doing it. The Department of Justice should also be treating violent crime as a top priority, but that's not what we're seeing from this Department of Justice. In the summer of 2020, under the Trump administration, the Department of Justice conducted Operation Legend, which was targeted towards prosecuting violent criminals in places in America that had the worst rate of violent crime. This effort was a supplement to the overstretched state and local law enforcement and court systems which simply could not deal with the surge in violent crimes that they were seeing. But whenever a question about violent crime comes up, the Department of Justice only wants to talk about gun control, not punishing criminals who commit violent crime. I wrote a letter to the Department of Justice on February the 14th, 2022, to ask the department to answer this misguided and politicized approach to law enforcement. Now, we're here on the subject of this hearing. More than a year ago, the Department of Justice formed a task force on threats to election workers. It appears that only 4 cases have been announced as a result of this task force effort. Now, that's after more than a year's work, just 4. And there have been no charged acts of violence against election workers. These prosecutions may be very worthy, but the existence of a full DOJ task force is confusing. Compared to Operation Legend, which resulted in about 1,500 prosecutions for crimes involving drugs, guns, and violence. All that in less than 6 months. In light of Garland's past focus on intimidating parents who were concerned about school boards, I fear that there is a political element to the decision to focus on this area. This administration doesn't want to talk about the failed policies of Democratic cities where crime is spiking up, but a law enforcement agency like the Department of Justice should not be participating in those sorts of politics. The Department of Justice is the highest law enforcement agency in America. It must focus its priorities on challenges facing America today. That means addressing violent crime. If we can only reduce the homicide numbers to where they were before the defund the police movement, we could save as many as 6,000 lives per year, because that's how much it has spiked up in the last 2 years. Yet there is no murder surge task force, no task force for combating the 20-year high in police killings, no carjacking task force, certainly no task force for the threats and arsons against crisis pregnancy centers and churches in the wake of the Dobbs decision. The Department of Justice is not choosing what to convene task forces on by levels of violence. They're choosing a political message, I believe, and that will have a real consequence on the safety and lives of many Americans. I yield.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. In the current Congress, this Judiciary Committee has held hearings on law enforcement officer safety, mass shootings, domestic terrorism, protecting children from gun violence, carjackings, hate crimes, reducing violence in Chicago, violence against women, and more, including multiple oversight hearings of law enforcement agencies. We have another oversight hearing tomorrow with the director of the FBI scheduled. The subject of this hearing is threats to election workers. We have 2 panels. The first panel, we welcome the Assistant Attorney General Kenneth Polite. Assistant Attorney General Polite is a longtime federal prosecutor who oversees the Justice Department's criminal division, including the Election Threats Task Force. We also welcome Kim Wyman, Senior Election Security Advisor at CISA, the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Prior to CISA, Ms. Wyman, a Republican, served for nearly a decade as Washington's elected Secretary of State, so she certainly knows this field very well, and we welcome her. I'm going to ask them both to be sworn in. They'll then be given 5 minutes each for opening statements, and then a round of questioning from the senators, up to 5 minutes each, and then our second panel will be recognized. If you would please stand. If you raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give before this committee be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect both witness answered in the affirmative. Mr. Polite, I'm going to allow you to start.
Good morning, Chairman Durbin.
You want to make sure your mic's on.
Good morning, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and members of the committee. Thank you for